In this exciting episode, we wrap up Perry's second season by going from Ruth Whittaker to Ruth Prescott and ranking all 30 of Season 2's defendants from worst to first. It's a very special edition of The Perry Pod, the case of the sordid suspects, Season 2 edition! Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy. My purpose here, pretty simple, provide an audio companion to the greatest legal drama in television history, Perry Mason. I plan to do a pod for every episode of the television series, and as time permits, I'll take a look at some of those made-for-TV movies too. To end Season 2, I thought we'd do something new, rank the defendants. I thought it'd be a way of talking about the grab bag of episodes in this second season in a fun, unorthodox way. Season 2 had some major differences from Season 1. Only 30 episodes in contrast to the 39 episodes in Season 1. Also, only 14 of those 30 episodes were based on Earl Stanley Gardner novels. Nearly 90% of the first season episodes were based on ESG novels. We also had far more male defendants this season by percentage than we did in Season 1. And it's just a lot of television that's taken me over a year to complete, so I wanted a chance to review. So, I thought I'd rank the 30 defendants from worst to first, and in doing so, see what Perry's accomplished in navigating perjured parrots and lame canaries, howling dogs and caretakers' cats, romantic rogues and jaded jokers, curious brides and dubious bridegrooms, and everything in between. Let's start with the criteria! So, this is an unscientific process. I'm not going to assign scores or grades. I'm not ranking episodes. For instance, favorite episode of Season 1, The Case of the Screaming Woman. It only features a so-so defendant by my reckoning, though, Leona Walsh. That episode succeeds because of a really diabolical murder victim, Perry sparring with Eugene Jarrett, and the dynamite scene with Della on the stand. So even though I love that individual episode, if I were ranking Season 1's defendants, Leona Walsh may be near the bottom. So all I'm assessing here are the defendants, and to do so, I've asked 4 questions. Number 1. Was the defendant memorable? Believe it or not, if you just handed me a list of defendants' names from Season 2, I wouldn't automatically know what case they came from, at least until I put together this list. The best defendants, however, hand me the case name, I know the defendant. Hand me the defendant, I know the case. The case of the restless redhead? You better believe it's Evelyn Bagby. Quick, who is the defendant in Season 1's The Case of the Gilded Lily? You get a prize if you said Stuart Brent. I had to look it up. Number 2. Was the defendant the most compelling, non-permanent character in the case? Of course, Perry, Paul, and Della are compelling. What I'm getting at here is whether or not the defendant is the first character from the case who springs to mind when I think of the episode, or whether it's, say, the murder victim or the murderer or just someone adjacent to the case. Think of The Case of the Haunted Husband from Season 1. I automatically go to Doris Stefanik or Tanner the Butler, Cozy Little Place in Fresno. Gotta say, both of them outrank Claire Olger or Olger. We're not really sure. The characters in the show don't really know. She's the defendant, remember? In terms of compelling qualities, Stefanik's friendship, Tanner's accent, all that equals more compelling. And so Claire Olger would be further down the list. Number 3, does Perry respect the defendant? Perry's our main character. He'll be my main interpreter. If he gives the defendant respect, I should too. How do I determine that respect? Well, first, there's crucial individual meetings in his office or in prison. And is he scolding in those scenes or is he appreciative? And then, of course, the post-case denouement. Is the defendant actually in the episode's final scene? Sort of like a comedian getting asked to come over to Johnny Carson's desk after an excellent stand-up performance? If the defendant didn't make it to the final scene, does Perry actually address the defendant's situation? That is, did he care? That was a huge factor for me. And then number 4, do we have a prior history with the actor or actress? Like it or not, ghosting is a thing. Do you know that term, ghosting? It's the term for the way an actor or actress's previous roles haunt the role you're currently watching them in. So you're watching Ironside. You know Ironside was Perry Mason. You can't help it. What I'm asking here is whether or not we have a positive or negative association with the actor or actress from a previous appearance on the show. We have only 2 repeat defendants. Rhoda Reynolds from the case of The Curious Bride. That was Nadine from the case of the demure defendant. And Evelyn Gerard from the case of The Purple Woman. That was Janet Morris in the case of The Fugitive Nurse. But we had lots of other ghosting opportunities, most notably with Stacey Harris, who in the same season went from being the murder victim in the case of The Merry Moonlighter to the defendant in the case of The Lost Last Act. When it all shook out, I have 3 tiers of defendants. First tier is the also ran. Second tier is the sentimental faves. Final tier, the Hall of Famers. Okay. Enough preliminaries. Let's jump in with the also rans. I've only got 6 defendants in this bottom tier. Coming in at number 30 is Ed Garvin from the case of the dubious bridegroom.
It concerns my ex-wife.
About 5'8", blonde, lovely figure, beautiful legs.
Well, you're describing Laurie.
Laurie?
My present wife.
The dude is supposed to be in love, but he can't get his wife's hair color right? She's not a blonde, Ed. Now, this is a decent case, but I find Ed ineffectual and basically forgettable. I put Helen Bynum and the second wife above him in terms of the case's most compelling characters. Perry shows more respect for the new Mrs. Garvin than her husband. Coming in at number 29, Tom Wyatt, the weary inventor from the case of the glittering goldfish.
I think that a man like Huxley isn't fit to live.
Just ask me cold about this episode and I couldn't tell you the dude's name. I had to look it up. All I know is that his girlfriend, the office secretary, would have been a better defendant. He's obviously not as compelling as the murderer, Daryl Metcalf. Him, I remember, and that Perry agrees with me because in the episode's final scene, he's only concerned with Metcalf and his gifted aquarium. Number 28, Evelyn Gerard from The Case of the Purple Woman.
I may have been guilty of bad judgment, but that's as far as it went.
Actress Bethel Leslie, who portrayed Gerard, is sort of doing the same thing as her first appearance in The Case of the Fugitive Nurse. A woman on the outs with her husband. But man, in this episode, she's actually stepping out with an art critic, which makes her routine less defensible. And I couldn't have told you her name if you paid me. And she's less compelling again than the murderer, the drunken painter, and her husband, the creepy noir villain that he is. Plus, Perry and Della and Paul can't even be bothered to mention her in the denouement. Just to put it in perspective, Perry spends more time quoting a Hamilton Burger piece from a law journal than he does assessing where Evelyn's going to go from here following her acquittal. Number 27, it's David Craig, or should I say Dr. David Craig, the bedeviled doctor himself.
Look, Perry, she didn't kill him. She couldn't have. I know, Edith.
Dave, you just got through saying you didn't even know yourself.
Yep. He's in the title, but this is one of those cases where I'm left questioning his competency, mostly because Perry does it. He's a bad boss, that is, David Craig is, with no self-awareness, a questionable method of handling his work, and then there's the other characters, who, frankly, are more compelling. Mark Douglas, the nostril-flaring murder victim, Craig's patient, Peter Haywood, and Craig's nurse, Edith. It's not that he's forgettable, it's more that he's not someone I particularly liked. Let's just say that Perry and Della end the episode by talking about Dana Lewis, Peter Haywood's secretary, not the esteemed doctor. Number 26 is Eva Martell from The Case of the Borrowed Brunette.
Well, we need the money desperately for Eva. She's studying music, and that takes a lot of money, Mr. Mason.
Notice how her aunt talks for her? That's telling. She's already a stand-in just from the title, and I think this one's a product of me having read the novel, where the relationship between the titular borrowed brunette and her caretaker is compelling, and then seeing the episode where the case is more about Perry's legal know-how and John Stevenson's possessive husband shtick and the matronly Agnes Nulty's care than it is Martell herself. So why is Martell above the others? She's actually in the final scene. But notice that she never speaks, only Agnes does, and that none of the questions are about her boyfriend. Perry and Paul are more concerned with Helen Reynolds than Eva. Number 25 is Joseph Dexter, the clerk from The Case of the Sardonic Sergeant.
I don't know what to think anymore.
I really like this case, but not because of Dexter. The dead man, the murderer, the bad dad, the illegitimate daughter, they're all more compelling than Dexter. I had to look the dude's name up. And in the end, Perry and Della and Paul care more about the money and Willie Smith than they do Dexter. Now, let's get to our second tier, the sentimental faves. This second tier is composed of defendants who for one reason or another tugged at my heartstrings, but who because of one kind of complication or another did not reach Hall of Fame defendant status. This is by far the largest of the three tiers, so I'll be grouping several of these defendants together. Coming in at number 24, it's George Andrews, the Bassett contractor in The Case of the Calendar Girl.
Was Loretta Harper in the scheme?
She was.
I sympathize with our graft-surrounded man, and somehow he makes it into the final scene, which is why he's in this tier. But too many other characters outrank him. He's not in the title. I couldn't point to one heroic thing the guy does. Okay case, meh defendant. At number 23 and number 22, we have Ruth Whittaker from The Case of the Corresponding Corpse and Sarah Werner from The Case of the Shattered Dream. These two jilted lovers have man troubles, and how? Ruth Whittaker says it best.
I only made the same mistake thousands of women make. I believed a man when he told me he loved me.
Sarah Werner has even more cause for complaint. Osa Masson, who portrays Werner, appeared in The Case of the Desperate Daughter, where logic might lead you to make her the defendant. She wasn't. Lisa Bannister, her stepdaughter, was. In that episode, she had a murdering husband with a complicated past. In this episode, the dead man, Hans Briel, is a deadbeat.
That's a picture of my husband, Hugo, and my little girl, Kathy. Taken 2 years ago in Chicago, Mr. Mason.
Alas, Whittaker annoys me, more so than when actress Joan Camden was in The Case of the Rolling Bones, and Werner gets less thought and screen time than her female counterpart Virginia Trent, played by the same actress who was the defendant from The Case of the Green-Eyed Sister, and Sarah's situation is more pitiable, so that's why she gets the tiebreaker. Number 21, 20, and 19 go to the better luck next time, boys gang. Harry Bright, Martin Ellis, and Danny Harrison. All three struggle. Harry, from The Case of the Petulant Partner, may or may not have lost his lifetime partner. It's not really clear in the end, and doesn't seem headed for nuptials with the woman who's been pining for him. He remembers better days.
I was the musclehead. Chucky was the brains.
Actor R.G. Armstrong, who plays Harry Bright, was the duped granddad in The Case of the Black-Eyed Blonde, an episode where he does show up in the final scene. Here, too many things left uncertain for me to rank him higher. Number 20, Martin Ellis from The Case of the Fancy Figures, wrongly convicted of embezzlement. He gets acquitted of murder, only to find out his wife was having an affair with the murder victim during the trial. Almost, Martin. Also, the president of his firm did commit murder. So guess who's out of a job? This is a telling quotation from Martin.
I've met you twice. Each time I've been behind bars. You suppose that's an omen?
And then we have Danny Harrison from The Case of the Married Moonlighter, a brilliant man slinging hash at a diner to make ends meet while his little girl struggles to walk.
I don't mind scrimping for myself, but I won't let Carol suffer.
Honey, I promise you I'll take care of everything. I'll get the money somehow.
By the time the case is done, he and his wife are back on good terms, but what about his money woes? All three have affecting stories, but leave something to be desired in the closure department. We get more emotion from Chuck Clark, who goes from wedded bliss to murderous rage. Dipsomaniac Valerie Brewster obscures Ellis's cheating wife, and Luke Hickey's failed business venture crowds out Harrison's unsolved economic woes. Danny gets the nod over Harry and Martin because his wife actually seems to come back to him as he goes through his ordeal. Number 18 and number 17, we have the transformation duo, Rhoda Reynolds and Ted Balfour. These are two characters that could have been further developed for maximum impact. We get told they've changed. Rhoda, played by Christine White, now knows what she needs in a man.
He realizes that pity is not a basis for marriage. He'd like an annulment.
Well, of course I won't oppose it, but are you sure he doesn't need me?
I'm sure.
I know someone that does need you, though, Rhoda. A certain Dr. Harris.
Her first hubby's a killer. She's choosing better. She's moving up. A doctor. Hey. Then there's Ted, who learns something from Perry.
Which bill is that, grandfather? For legal services or for teaching me how to fight?
And look at them both showing up in the respective closing scenes of The Case of the Curious Bride and The Case of the Lucky Loser. Still, something is off with these two tales of transformation. Rhoda is less compelling than Nadine. She needs to be told she needs a new man. And Ted talks about learning how to fight, but we don't really see him prove it. Ted gets the tiebreaker because he got the episode's final line. Number 16 and number 15, the AARP double bill with Dr. Blaine from The Case of the Buried Clock and Grandpa Renzi from The Case of the Pint-Sized Client. These guys are inspirational. Look at Dr. Blaine. First, let's acknowledge this guy's the husband of the murderer in The Case of the Drowning Ducks. He comes off way better here. And in a first, he calls up Perry and the denouement to say they've discovered the money his now dead son-in-law stole. Calling in. Sweet.
Dr. Blaine.
Put him on, Gertie. Hello, Doctor. Well, good. Yes, I guess we were all lucky.
They recovered the cash, too? He's not in person, but he gets to talk to our intrepid hero on the phone. And then there's Gramps. Grandpa Renzi, loving his grandson, helping him grow. You gotta love them both.
How can I ever repay Mr. Mason? That I don't know.
Well, I'm going to take care of it, Gramp. I told Miss Street I'm going to get a job.
You know how long it would take to pay for the services of a man like Mr. Mason?
So why are they this low? Well, they're outshined by other characters in their respective episodes. The villains are the real stars of The Case of the Buried Clock, if you don't count the clock itself. And then there's Gramps' grandson, the titular pint-sized client. As a result, I put both of them in the middle of the pack. Next up, the Redeem duo. At number 14, it's Frank Brooks from The Case of the Lost Last Act.
It's been nice knowing you, Faith.
What are you trying to tell me?
I already told you. Now you got the money. Take it and get out of town fast.
Stacey Harris played a drunk rich loser in The Case of the Married Moonlighter, and he got. In this episode, it looks like he's the heavy, an organized crime dude who's crazy for a two-timing girl. But he's no entertainer, and he's no longer a criminal. He's a businessman with a past. That's it. He's the rare client who gets initially turned down by Perry and then earns Perry's approval throughout the case. Plus, he gets to host everybody at his joint for flamin' hamburgers. Having Perry come to your joint, that's respect. And number 13, James Hing from The Case of the Caretaker's Cat. What do you remember about Mr. Hing? First, actor Benson Fong, who portrays Hing, was the able caretaker from the case of the empty tin. Second, Hing remained loyal to his employer. So why is Mr. Hing above Mr. Brooks? He makes it to the final scene, and he gets a pep talk from Della. And he's got the positive history with Gao Long.
So you were loyal to Peter Baxter too, Mr. Hing. All along, all the way.
At the end, he was like a sick eagle. He was strong and fierce all his life. And yet, through this whole thing, I felt like I was protecting him. Strange, isn't it?
Rarefied air indeed. Now, two women who had to deal with crazy men. Number 12, Claire Allison, who dealt with the possessive and sociopathic Martin Selkirk. She's an amateur detective. Just look at how she found that hand press. And she's quite a woman, earning the affection of both dead Martin and the still alive Dick Benedict.
Before that, did Martin Selkirk ask you to come back to him?
Oh, yes. He told me in just so many words that if I didn't marry him, I would never marry anybody.
Claire's got it going on, and she's innocent at the end of the case. Good for her. Number 11 is Evelyn Forbes, the put-upon defendant in the case of the howling dog. She escapes from an asylum. She drives right up and confronts her ex-husband. Her dog loves her.
Hello, Clinton.
The last I heard, you're in New York, in an institution. What do you want?
You stole $125,000 from me, and I want it back. I don't want to depend on my brother's generosity.
Plus, there is the pathos factor, the lost brother, the schnook of an ex, and the fact that her dog is still alive per the episode's final scene where it's licking off Paul Drake's face. That gives her the tiebreaker. And number 10 is Freddie Green from the case of the Jaded Joker. No one else on the left saves another man from suicide, and while Danny Ross, the titular Joker, gets the headline, Green is essential to his boss's success. Who thought up this routine?
Try Yellow Bellies for relief of headaches. 5 world-famous critters guarantee it to be the chickenest way out of all troubles, small, medium, or large.
Both Danny Ross and Perry know that Green is crucial too. Green is willing to go to jail for his boss, and Danny says so from the stand. Congrats, Freddie. Top 10 is nothing to be jaded about, Daddy-O. We conclude our second tier with a quartet of sob sisters who get their happiness restored. At number 9 is Ruth Prescott, the criminal husband, the devoted ex, the appearance in the final scene with Berger actually acknowledging and kind of apologizing to her.
I believe you know Lieutenant Tragg and Mr. Berger.
Yeah, we met. I'm sure we'd both rather forget the circumstances.
She went through it all. The season began and ended with a Ruth, and of the two, I'd say Prescott's the keeper. Number 8 is Carol Delaney. She has millions held out to her via Bishop Mallory. She has, frankly, not that great of a boyfriend, but she has spirit and spunk, and she's got a mom who did her wrong, and now she's got a mom who wants to say she's sorry. And when Perry reads her the letter in the final scene, well...
It's signed Mrs. Charles Burroughs, Jr.
My mother?
A human being, Carol. She made a mistake, as all of us do. Are you ready to forgive her?
Do you have her address?
It's all pretty powerful. Number 7 is Helen Harvey. A, this is Marion Cunningham. B, she gets a sweet tell the dude off scene with Stacy, the romantic rogue who intended to con her out of a fortune. C, she's good enough to actually convert the con man into a stand-up guy. D, she gets to enjoy a scene of bliss with her new husband.
Where are you?
Las Vegas. Stacy and I got married 20 minutes ago.
And E, Stacy stands by her as she gets charged with murder. In a perverse way, Helen's aunt's behavior shows that her aunt loves her too. Way to go, Helen! Number 6, from Helen to Ellen. Monteith, that is. The librarian from the case of the perjured parrot is a great example of a sob sister. The man who she loved appears to be dead, and to make matters worse, she's going to be charged with his murder. She provides a spirited defense of her love affair.
He had the most wonderful philosophy. I thought he was the nicest, kindest man I'd ever known. And then 2 weeks ago, we went to Las Vegas and got married quietly.
And then Perry unearthed the truth, and she loved the deceased's brother, not the deceased. Guess who's standing there in the final scene with her arm around the love of her life? Our number 6 defendant, Ellen Monteith. Now, let's get to the Hall of Famers. Here they are. If you only have 5 available slots for defendants from season 2, these are the ones I'd pick. Coming in at number 5 is Jimmorrow from The Case of the Spanish Cross. His dad thinks a lot of him. He inspires a speech from Perry. He's gonna care for his dad at the episode's end, and don't forget, he's a man, Della.
Now, Jim, don't you be a stranger.
Oh, I won't.
Quite a boy.
Quite a man.
At number 4, we got Ruth Lee as Millie Crest in The Case of the Footloose Doll. She's an ice pick wielding roommate who's not a she-devil, and so although she doesn't get the hindmost, she gets the hintermost on our list of season 2 defendants. What a redemption! She was one of season 1's most empathetic murderers, Connie Cooper. Here as Millie Crest or Fern Driscoll, take your pick, Ruth Lee has pathos and justice to spare. Number 3 is Sylvia Oxman. Until I made the episode on The Case of the Dangerous Dowager, I wouldn't have had Sylvia in my top 10, but it was a combination of watching the episode closely, this wonderful speech about thinking.
I wish we'd talked like this before.
I don't think I could. I know it sounds a kind of paradox, but being in here has given me a kind of freedom. I don't think very clearly, Mr. Mason. Sitting in a cell alone, I've had the time to try to learn.
And my look at the actress Patricia Cutts and her tragic end that gave me more respect for her. This is a tough role. Sylvia has to be beaten down, has to be an addict, has to be desirable, and has to be transformed by her experience. That's a lot. And I think Cutts nailed it. Number 2 is Brander Harris. This looks like a job for Hugh Marlowe. Number 1, first lawyer Perry has defended in the series. Number 2, he's a young and up-and-coming professional who's making waves, willing to tackle real corruption. Maybe Hamilton Berger should be doing this in LA. Maybe he is. We don't know. Anyway, it's refreshing to see a DA go after someone who's actually guilty. Number 3, Perry thinks so much of Harris that he becomes a deputy prosecutor.
Good luck, Perry. You know, I don't know how I was going to conduct that hearing. I haven't the slightest idea how you will.
4, plus there he is in the final scene, sharing a meal with Perry and picking up the bill. You do you, Hugh. And here he is, my number 1 defendant for season 2. Don't judge a defendant by his physical size, but by the size of his heart. And by that measure, Tick Barton of The Case of the Jilted Jockey is a giant of a man. He's a lover, he's a fighter, he's a writer. He learns lessons.
Like I told you, Mr. Mason, it's wonderful to be free. And from now on, I'm going to pick on girls my own size.
Plus, he's portrayed by real-life jockey Billy Pearson, a man whose outsized bio we covered in that episode's Della. He's my choice for the top defendant of season 2. Eat your heart out, Johnny Starr! Well, that's all she wrote for season 2. As always, I'd love feedback about this particular episode of the podcast in general. Did you enjoy the episode? What if I did one on season 1's defendants? Yay? Nay? More importantly, who are the standout defendants for you from season 2? What were your favorite episodes? Do those lists look the same? Holla at me at theperrypod@gmail.com. You'll find that address in the show notes. All Perry Pod episodes are available via Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. Join us next time, where before we start season 3, we'll cover the 4th Perry Mason made-for-TV movie, The Case of the Lost Love. Gene Simmons, that's the actress, not the Kiss bassist, stars in that made-for-TV movie. Join us, won't you? Thanks so much for joining me on this pod journey. Until next time, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat!